Started here. We have we have I'm not going to have like a lot of really deep concepts. I actually want to keep this kind of a more informal way of looking at phonics as a means for developing skills, but looking also as a way to really start enhancing how students have a developing passion for reading. And a lot of that is dependent on how we as educators express our own passion for phonics. And a lot of people look at phonics as one of these things that maybe is routine, maybe is boring. That's always been kind of that pendulum swing. Like it doesn't really bring about a passion for reading. But I'm a person who thinks opposite. So let's get right in. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to express them either in chat or just unmute because we have a really nice small group that we can communicate with. So I'm gonna do really briefly an overview of what phonics is, the why we present phonics in a classroom, and this can be from grades K, which means us and students, and the how. So let me share a little bit about me because I think it's important to know who you're talking to start with. I actually started out in wildlife biology. I was working seasonally with lynx surveys and bat surveys and all sorts of stuff. I went to the University of Montana for that, and that was a seasonal job basically. And in the off season during the winter, I was going and substituting at our local Montana rural school. And I found a deep passion for working with the kids. I started in preschool and saw what early literacy could really do for students. And then just kind of fell in love with it from there and went back and got my teaching degree and began to work in that same rural school. I worked anywhere from pre-K to eighth grade. Um, and my principal was really encouraging and said, I think you would be a good principal or administrator at some point. So I went back and I did my educational leadership degree, and I started splitting my time between the classroom and kind of being the assistant principal of that school. And then I kind of wanted to expand. I wanted to get some new learning and new experiences under my belt. And I found a position on the Oregon coast as an instructional coach and literacy specialist, which really combined my love for reading instruction with some admin skills that I had developed. And my role throughout the years just kind of keeps changing. So I'm ever evolving and ever learning, and my approach changes all the time. So I want to first and foremost say that education is one of those things that we just kind of have to roll with, not only our own experiences, but the students we have, and the expectations have to change as well. So I'm pretty sure all of us are here on a Saturday morning are very familiar with Scarborough's reading rope. And of course, where we're really going to focus on is this word recognition piece. To me, all three of those aspects, phonological awareness, decoding, which also to me includes encoding or spelling, and sight recognition, are all major components to phonics. And if you don't have that strand of the rope down yourself as an instructor, and how to really um, convey all of the different components of that to your students, then your students are never going to have that as a strong string in their own education. So we as teachers have to be just as informed and educated and on as we can be when it comes to the word recognition component. Language comprehension is obviously as important too because they support one another, but my focus will be in the word recognition segment. All right, so phonological awareness. Oh, and before we get really rolling, I would love if you could make sure that you have maybe some scratch paper and a pen. We'll have some little activities going on throughout this presentation that just just to make you think, just to make you have the association with what we're talking about. Phonological awareness is understanding the connection between the change patterns in a word and how it makes. I want you to understand that phonological awareness, sound recognition, it's only oral. It has nothing to do with grapheme association. We start phonological awareness from infancy when we're talking to our kids in at home. Um, the more that you use oral language in the house, the more students come prepared to do phonological awareness skills in the classroom. And I think most of us in early elementary can really see the difference between households that have strong language and communication going on with their students at home, when in the classroom they're able to do so much of what we're asking them without as much effort. They may still struggle here and there, but for the most part, left to their own devices, they can hear the subtle sound changes between words and understand that those shifts make the word have a different definition. So I'm actually going to give you a list of words orally, and I'd like you to just jot down the changes in sound from word to word that you hear, and then we're going to share them out. All right. So my first set is thick, sift, lift, rift, with, and wit. So sit, sift, lift, rift, with, riff, with, and wit. Very, very subtle changes there. My next list, we'll change. We'll look at them after we look at all three. When, went, wet, yet, yen. Again, when, went, wet, yet, yen. And our last one is cloud, clown, crown, crowd, and cowed. Cloud, crown, or cloud, clown, crowd, crowd, cowed. All right, if you want to just share out some of the things that you tell me how these words changed in the list that I gave you. So in some of them, it was the vowel sound. Very good. Some of them were the onset. Good. And some of them were the ending sound. Very good. So what we're seeing is that those slight shifts can really make an impact on what the word means. Like in the first set, just between the first and second word, sit and sift, I just added one sound. And sift is not a word that most kids anymore would probably understand the meaning of. So that might require a little bit of explanation about what the meaning is for that word, which opens up the door for vocabulary extension, etc. So when you're doing these word chaining exercises, and it again, this is all oral, you might have to stop and explain some things. So never back away from those learning opportunities when you're doing just really, really quick routines, because when I look at that list, I see sift and riff and whiff, and those aren't super common words that students might be engaged with. So you might have to actually spend a little bit of time and do some vocabulary development too. So just like we were talking about with the reading rope, everything is interconnected. So when we're doing phonological awareness, we might be able to make some vocabulary and comprehension connections as well. Um, I think what is also really, really interesting is that we often look at the things that we're most familiar with when we're doing this ourselves. Like, do I really attach myself with the vowel sound? Do I hear that more easily? Or do I think about the beginning sound? Typically, when we're doing word chaining, we start with beginning sounds because that is something that students glom onto really, really quickly. And then we go to the more complex phonological skills as we go on. We can start this even in our own households just for a fun game. We can do this really, really quick at morning circle with our students. Um, I like moving on to word chaining as a written encoding process when my students are more developed and are in an intervention group because it's a really fun warm up game that we do. So, phonological awareness skills are something that carries through clear into upper elementary as long as you continue to develop skills that are more fitting with what they're doing in phonics instruction. So when we think about decoding, we often, well, not often, we're thinking about how that letter sound associates with the grapheme. And we have very concrete rules as to how letters sound, what the graphemes are associated with. And we start with the most basic of those and then move into more complex spellings, more complex rules, exceptions to the rules that we already know. So it's really important that whenever we're doing a phonics lesson, whether you're using UFLI, Foundations, ECRI, 95th percent group, in any of those, that we make sure that we are continually building on a scope and sequence that goes through that range of simple to more complex. Because just like in a math lesson, language develops in this hierarchy, and you need to have a very strong, simple foundation before you can start adding more complex rules and lessons that students really, even as adults, we question how to. Very good. Yes, Timothy Ransacki is awesome. That we can be up at the board and look at something and say, "Oh, I didn't quite do that right," and that's okay because we as humans and the English language is not exactly straightforward and easy. So um, mistakes are going to be made, but you have to have a really, really strong foundation in order for students to build knowledge. And we often remember according to either how we ourselves were taught or the program that we're using for phonics. So I want you to actually think about the fact that, in those word chains, we had a sound that changed, and it was a whole lot easier when I put the spelling, the graphemes associated with those words to see what the very concrete changes were between each of those words. So to know what a word actually says, a reader has to look closely at every single letter and be able to decode each of those sounds. And we build that knowledge with phonological awareness and move into decoding and encoding. Encoding is often, people think that spelling is not a part of decoding, and it absolutely is because that shows a true mastery of the skill. We often see students are really, really fluid decoders and can read really, really well. But then you hand them a piece of paper and actually just give them words from what they just read, and they have a much harder time because it's that extra step in your brain to go into the encoding and recognition of, oh, now I have to think of the grapheme associated with the sound and the options that I can choose from and the rule that I have to follow. There's a lot more of a process going on with encoding, but it does show true mastery of whatever the decoding skill is. So I want you to think about how many different ways can you spell the sound? And I want you to jot that down. How many different ways can you spell the sound? And when you're ready, you can unmute yourself or go ahead and share out in the chat. What are the different ways that we spell? So Melinda is saying there are 3 different ways. Stephanie is adding OUGH. Very good. So for the most part, we say that there are four concrete ways to spell that sound. And if we think of some examples, we have the as in half, the double F spelling as in staff, the PH digraph in phone, and GH. Now, sometimes it's OUGH, sometimes it's IGH. So so we have to remember sometimes that vowel can change. But there are 4 different ways that we can spell. And again, what I find really, really interesting is that in the responses that I got from you all, we started with the most basic, right? Just the simple, let's add an F to a word and it'll have that sound. Then some people remembered, oh, I need to double that. Okay, that's the next step. Well, then we have digraphs, and sometimes this is called a digraph exception because of where along the pathway for learning this in scope and sequence happens. The PH and then the GH. Well, GH can sound a whole lot of different ways. So sometimes we don't even think about that one. So it is really interesting, even as adults, we like to go through a scope and sequence of what is our own understanding of what graphemes can create of sound. And a lot of times we forget or miss one because it's something that is used so rarely, or it happens more often in uncommon or academic words that it doesn't even hit our radar until somebody else mentions it. And you're like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I know those words, obviously. So it's really interesting to me when presenting this kind of information to students because they require so many more practice opportunities than we ever think they should. I work with multiple different levels of foundations groups, um, as and watching the levels build is really, really interesting, and watching a student build those sounds throughout the levels is really interesting because it will take some time for them. They will verbalize, oh wait, well, I can think of this word and it's spelled this way, or I can think of this word and it has this spelling. So they actually start building a concrete lexicon of how to spell certain words, which is really, really cool. Has anyone found a sound that is particularly hard to get your students to really understand the spelling of because of how many different spellings there is? I know vowel teams can be a harried. I'm experiencing that with actually one of my groups right now. The vowel teams can be a very, very harried learning experience for some. All right. So this is just a simple cartoon kind of reiterating OG8 makes a lot of different sounds. So those exceptions can throw students off. They throw adults off. And it unless you are a teacher who can go back and really express and explicitly teach that some of those sounds are from historical or background words, background root languages, most kids won't make that connection until much, much later in life. So we have to explicitly teach why OUGH makes three different sounds. And then, of course, we come to sight word recognition. And I still have a lot of folks that confuse this with, like the fry list or the high frequency word list or the trick word list. That's not what we're actually talking about when we think about sight word recognition. We want students to be able to decode so smoothly that given a word in context, they're able to see the word as a whole and know exactly what that word is, how to pronounce it, and what the meaning of the word is. So they're continually making their own library of words that they read with automaticity. Now, irregular words we teach in a very, very specific way to show why there is the irregularity, right? Sight words often just happen and develop, or sight word recognition often just happens due to so many experience with the word, and then practice opportunities with the word. So it becomes embedded in their library of words that they just know how to read without error. Um, so this can be sometimes a little complicated without reading a word in context. So we often think of sight word recognition as part of a contextual way of reading, because I want you to think about the word date, okay? And I want you to jot down as many meanings of the word date as you possibly can without any context. I just want to know, what are some of the meanings of the word date? I'll give you a couple of seconds to jot down your ideas, and then please share them out in the chat. All right, I have Beth, who I love that you said fruit first, because that was actually the one that I had to think about a little bit when I actually got to thinking about it. Fruit, calendar day, meeting. Um, oh, my chat box is having issues here. Something on a calendar, a food, a meetup. I'll date myself here. Oh, I didn't think about that one. That one's great. Uh, because we use that as kind of a turn of phrase, a tongue-in-cheek turn of phrase. Very good. Something on a calendar. All right. So you guys get the idea. This can be a time on a calendar. It can be a fruit. It can be a romantic outing. I love the use of I'll date myself here. Students will often um, categorize and make these connections between all of those different meanings depending on experience with the word and what they experience in their life. So right now, probably the biggest meaning understanding would be a time on a calendar. As students get older, date obviously will go to either a meeting or a romantic outing or dating someone, quote unquote. And a fruit is really interesting to me because I have some students who come from a more Mediterranean background, and dates and figs are part of their regular diet. So for them, one of their first responses is date, whereas myself, who grew up in Eastern Wyoming, dates had nothing to do. That was like the dried fruit Christmas treat. We didn't get dates as a regular thing. We had raisins. We were, that was our thing. So a date to some students could be something that is very, very common, whereas for many others, it would be less so. So when they have sight word recognition, they're looking for all of those context clues that are going to give me the meaning behind that word. Even though they can read this perfectly easily, they're going to be looking for meaning from the other words around that. So they have to be able to decode everything and create an idea or a picture in their head of what is being said. So that comprehension piece, again, we talk about the strands of the rope. Comprehension has to be working alongside decoding and phonics abilities. So let's talk about the why of phonics. For years, the pendulum kind of swung to this whole language idea, right? That students would develop a passion for reading if they were just exposed to enough books. Well, what we found, obviously, and what years of research found is that it's not even a debate anymore. Phonics instruction has to happen because we have so many students who can't just understand whole language. They can't just pick up a book and because they like the topic of the book, know how to read it. And this was something that was really, really difficult for me because I went to school as a reader. My mom was an English teacher, and I know that she spent time doing phonological awareness drills with me as a kid, even though to me it was just fun games. And I came from a household of readers. So when I went to kindergarten, I was reading. So when I became an educator, I do have to say that I didn't feel that my training for education gave me a really good, solid foundation about science of reading or how to present decoding and phonics to students. They just said it should just be a part of your program. Well, great. How do I do that? So I had to spend years when I found students who couldn't just pick up a book and read. I had to spend years trying to teach myself, well, what is an effective approach for teaching phonics? What is the scope and sequence that I need to apply so that they have the best foundational skills? All of these things are crucial, crucial, crucial components to successful reading. And what you'll find is that if I can decode, well, then I can find books that might interest me and that I might develop a passion about. And then there's not this worry of, well, I can't read. I just want to look at the pictures. It's I want to see what the message is. So I don't think there can really be any debate about why phonics instruction is absolutely important and crucial to successful reading anymore. But not all phonics instruction is created equal. So I um, I have gone through a lot of the different curriculum that were approved by the state of Oregon when we did our own adoption in my school system. And there was a lot of feedback from my teachers on our committee saying that they wanted something that had a really, really solid scope and sequence for them to follow. Not that it was idiot proof, but that they wanted something so uniform across our school district that every student would have the exact same experience with phonics instruction, not depending on whatever school it was. Everybody would have the exact same thing. And we had to make sure there were some non-negotiable characteristics within the curriculum that we choose. We actually ended up choosing Wilson Foundations, but I know that there's plenty of schools that do UFLI. I know there's plenty of schools that do other forms of phonics instruction. And as long as those systems have explicit instruction, which means that there has to be clear learning objectives for each lesson, there has to be lots of examples, lots of practice opportunities, and lots of opportunities for us as instructors to give direct and concrete feedback and correct anything that's wrong, and then give more and more practice opportunities. That has to be built in. It has to be systematic, which means that the students coming into the instruction know what the expectations are. There are going to be routines, whether it's for the first 5 minutes you go through flashcards or the first 5 minutes you do some skywriting or whatever it is. There has to be a system in place, no matter the level of phonics that you're teaching, that students come in and know this is what we're doing. This is why we're practicing it. It is going to improve my reading. And then, of course, sequential. As we talked about earlier, we have to make sure that there is something foundational first, and then you build the next level of more complicated phonics skills, and then the next level and the next level until you get to morphology, where you're working with word parts and meaning behind word parts, and more into the historical background of words and why PSY makes a certain sound. We don't have that except for in some academic language that we use for the most part. But we want to make sure that we have those ground floor phonic skills built in before we start adding things that might turn the tables a little bit and might create some more areas of confusion. Things have to be very concise and very regimented in order to build those next steps. And the one thing that I want to make sure is that students are successful where they are at before they are presented new material. The one thing I really, really like about the program we use is that it has a requirement for mastery before we can move on, whether it's whole group, small group, or whatever. There is a requirement before a student is taught the next thing for them to be able to show what they know with at least 80% mastery. And when you think about what 80% looks like, that's not awesome, but it's a lot higher than I think sometimes we pace things out on. We say, oh, well, the majority of the class has this, but it might only be 50 to 60% of students who are expressive about what they know actually have a solid footing in a specific phonics area. And then we move on and it just adds layers of confusion. So the who of phonics, I think this is probably the most important part. There are two key participants in phonics instruction. The students, obviously, and they have to be, your expectation for the students is that they are active, they are fully engaged, and they are fully participating in all the activities that are part of your routine. When you have students who stray away from this, they are not getting those engagement activities and practice opportunities that they need to become fluent decoders and have the phonics skill down. In order to make this happen, you have to have a lesson that is very fast paced. I love Anita Archer, and she says perky pace, and that's absolutely true, regardless of whether it's a phonics lesson or a vocabulary lesson. You want to give the point, teach it explicitly, and then provide multiple modes of learning and practicing. You have to have established routines so that students know how to transition between each of the components of the lesson really, really seamlessly so that you're not wasting time. And then, like I said, you want multimodal practice opportunities. So choral responses, skywriting, tapping the sounds, manipulating letter sounds on tiles or felt pieces, or word chaining, or using the pop-up blocks, or building words with clay. There's so many different ways that we can create kinesthetic or artistic or literally just writing the word down is still engaging in another muscle memory part of the brain. And they need to have all of those aspects activated in order to be active, engaged, and full participants. The other component, oh, this should have said number two. I'm sorry for that error. The number two is you as the teachers. What I have found, and it's not just phonics, but especially in phonics because it can be so dry and it can be very, very regimented, is that you as a teacher have to be on the entire time. And what I mean by on is that you are presenting and you are showing that you have a passion for what they're learning. If you don't show excitement, they certainly are not going to show any excitement at all and not develop any kind of passion for what their learning is. And this goes across all content areas, but I find it particularly important in phonics because of what is being presented. And I think that is also why that pendulum swings in education, because we have so many kids who during a phonics lesson might not be engaged. But if they're seeing a teacher who is either not confident in their own understanding of the phonics or doesn't present well, then a lot of times they start to slip away. So we have to be highly responsive, not only in what we're saying to them, but then we have to give that our students a lot of opportunities to respond back and then give that immediate feedback and correction when it was needed. That way we're not building on mislearned behavior or mislearned facts. We're finding the error, we're correcting it immediately, and we're moving on and giving them so many practice opportunities that they're not afraid to be wrong or make a mistake anymore. It's just quick, lots of turnaround. And I don't want you to be afraid to have fun and be creative. You have to have the you-ness in any lesson that you do, including phonics. Um, I find that sometimes with my really littles making goofy voices for them to give me answers or spell a word or just it sometimes it's on the fly, sometimes it's planned, but you have to continually, even though you have routine, you have to continually change up either how it's presented or what the response is so that students are constantly thinking about, oh, what am I going to do next, not in terms of, oh, I don't know what's coming and I'm afraid of what's coming, but maybe there's something exciting. Maybe Miss Bennett is going to say, respond in a robot voice or a chicken voice, or I mean, and it can be absolutely ridiculous. And you can have a student full of kids who are happy and engaged, and it will bring a smile to your face as well. Um, and I do have to say that no matter what kind of phonics lesson you're doing, whether it's whole class or small group or intervention, if you are doing it right and you're on the entire time, you will be absolutely drained when the lesson is done. You'll feel some sense of exhaustion. And I can always tell when I'm doing it right versus when I'm doing it wrong, because if I am doing it wrong, I have a little bit more energy than I probably should at the end. If I'm doing it right and the students are with me the whole time, I'm tired, and that's how it should be. You should feel drained. This is not an easy concept for a lot of kids, and in order to make the biggest impact, you sometimes need to really put yourself out there. And that's why I say that being hooked on phonics as a teacher is just as important as the lesson that you're teaching to your students. So here's the big secret. Um, the only way to be hooked on phonics and for your students to feel that is for you to show passion about it too. Um, that it can't be something that's lackadaisical. And it's really hard sometimes going and doing observations as an instructional coach with teachers who either don't have that confidence or maybe don't have that experience, because I can see some deadness in the eyes of the students, and you don't want that, especially something that is such a crucial part of their reading journey. So again, you want to make sure that you are highly interactive. Get up and move. You need to skywrite. You need to form letters with your body or hands. And again, we always worry about classroom management, so you have to make sure that you're writing that line between fun and foundational. You can do the same routine where you're saying, oh, we're going to go over the sounds of these particular letters. We're going to skywrite. We're going to do Play-Doh. All of those different modes are creating the same impactful memory, but giving them another way to express it. Another thing that's really, really crucial is knowing the needs of your students and to meet them where they're making sure that we're teaching the whole group a particular phonics skill, but that also means that we need to continually assess whether it's a unit assessment for the curriculum you're using for phonics or if you're going through and doing a core phonics screener or checking out how they're performing on the words their way spelling assessment to see if that encoding component is going for them, you need to constantly check in and make sure that what's being presented is actually sticking. Um, if you don't have a whole lot of resources for screening your kids or making sure that you know exactly what data you're gathering from your assessments, I have at the end of this presentation, I have a whole list of resources. A lot of them I've gotten from PDX learners. I have a really good relationship with them, and they have some amazing resources that they have brought together, and I did share them with you as well. Um, and I think another really, really important aspect is to build confidence in our students. Um, so many times, a mistake is an opportunity to either expand some learning or correct learning that's happening more than with just one student. So seize those opportunities. Don't be afraid of mistakes. Just be positive when you're correcting it. I am horrible. I will fully admit that my spelling is not the best. And I will be spelling it right on my big whiteboard and I make a mistake. And I love, absolutely love when one of my students catches it. Because for one, it means that they are taking in what I'm saying. They are figuring it out and they are able to catch errors themselves, which is horrendously important when it comes to the writing process, right? Um, but it also shows that I'm human and it builds a better relationship for when we're doing our phonics lessons. In your lesson of what you want to teach, but you also need to be able to turn on a fly when you see something is not going well and have a plan B, C, D, E to try and make sure that they're getting the idea behind them. And then obviously empathy goes a really, really long way. Understand from your own learning, your own background, that phonics is not easy. The English language is not easy. And so making sure that you can totally say, yeah, I understand. I don't know why PH makes the sound, but I learned it. We can look this up together. Like give an opportunity to do the next step together. And you can't fake it. Like there is no faking it when it comes to phonics instruction. I have found that when I wasn't particularly confident about a certain thing, my students would call me on it and I would actually go home and I would find out the information. Like when they would ask, well, why is this spelling a certain way? Well, I can't fake if I don't know. So I would go home and I would look up, well, why is it? And then I would come back and tell them, and we would look at other examples. So again, you take things as learning opportunities. Um,
Tracy, I'm so sorry to jump in here. Our room is going to close in about 20 seconds. I just want to
yeah,
say thank you for
thank you. I'm so
doing
sorry.
such a beautiful job. No, you have so much to share. Thank you so much.
Well, the good thing is this is the last slide and then my resources.